I used to believe that silence was a kind of kindness. That if I stayed quiet, stayed helpful, stayed small, I could keep the peace. Growing up as my sister's shadow taught me that lesson early. She was the one who filled rooms without trying, the one adults praised for her confidence while gently reminding me how mature I was for my age. Mature was just another word for invisible. My sister, Clara, and I were only 2 years apart, but it felt like a lifetime. Where she demanded, I accommodated. Where she took, I learned to give before anyone asked. Our parents never meant to pit us against each other, but the comparison slipped out anyway, how she was bold, how I was thoughtful, how she needed attention, how I didn't. Over time, I realized that what they admired in me was my ability to disappear without complaint. So when Clara got engaged, no one was surprised that the wedding became the center of the universe. Every conversation circled back to her dress, her venue, her vision. I listened, nodded, offered help. I always did. When she asked me to assist with arrangements, to come early and be useful, I said yes before she finished the sentence. Part of me hoped, quietly, foolishly, that this was her way of including me. The invitation arrived 2 months later. Thick cream paper. Gold lettering. Elegant script. My name spelled correctly for once. I stared at it longer than I should have, letting hope settle somewhere fragile in my chest. Maybe this time will be different, I told myself. People changed. Weddings softened hearts. That's what movies promised, anyway. I ignored the small details that should have warned me. The invitation wasn't addressed like the others, no +1, no affectionate note tucked inside. When relatives asked where I'd be sitting, Clara brushed it off. "We'll figure it out," she said, smiling that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. I told myself not to read into it. I had made a career out of not reading into things. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I became part of the background machinery. I ran errands. I fixed seating charts she kept changing. I listened to her vent about stress, about expectations, about how hard it was to be the bride. When I mentioned feeling tired, she laughed. "You're good at handling things," she said. "That's your role." Your role. The words stuck with me, though I pretended they didn't. I told myself roles weren't permanent. That families grew, shifted. That maybe this wedding was a bridge instead of a wall. The night before the ceremony, I stood alone in my apartment, wrapping her gift carefully. It wasn't flashy, but it was meaningful, or so I thought. I tied the ribbon slowly, deliberately, as if patience itself were proof of love. As I worked, memories surfaced uninvited, birthdays where my wishes came second, holidays where I was asked to give up my seat, moments where I was present but never centered. Still, I showed up the next morning dressed carefully, hair neat, posture straight. I arrived early, just like she asked. I told myself I was there because I wanted to be, not because I always was. I didn't know then that the invitation had never been an olive branch. It was a reminder of where she believed I belonged. The ceremony ended to applause and soft music, the kind that made people believe in forever. I clapped when everyone else did, even smiled when my sister turned toward the crowd, radiant and victorious in white. For a brief second, our eyes met. I lifted my hand in a small wave. She didn't wave back. She just looked through me, as if I were part of the decor, useful, but not worth noticing. When guests began drifting toward the reception area, I followed the flow, clutching my small card with my name written in looping ink. I expected to find myself at the edge of the family tables, maybe near a pillar or in the back corner. I wasn't asking for center stage. I never had. The path kept going. Past the main canopy where laughter already spilled like champagne. Past the long tables dressed in linen and candles. Past the family section, where our parents sat proudly, surrounded by relatives. I slowed, confused, checking the card again. My name was still there. The arrow still pointed forward. Then I smelled it. Trash. 2 large bins stood near the back exit of the venue, lids half open, catering waste piled inside. Flies hovered lazily in the warm air. Beside them was a small folding table with a single chair. No centerpiece. No place setting, just a paper napkin and a plastic cup. I stared at it, waiting for the moment when someone would rush over, apologizing for the mistake. No one came. I felt heat crawl up my neck, my pulse pounding in my ears. This couldn't be real. I turned, searching for a coordinator, for anyone who looked like they might help. That's when I heard a familiar laugh behind me, light, amused, unmistakably hers. My sister stood a few feet away, her dress immaculate, her lipstick perfect. She took a slow sip from her champagne flute, eyes flicking from the trash cans to my face. "Well," she said, tilting her head, "guess you don't count." The words were soft. Casual. Deadly. Something inside me wanted to react, to ask why, to demand an explanation, to remind her of everything I had done. But years of conditioning held me still. I felt the familiar urge to smooth things over, to swallow the humiliation and sit down quietly where I was placed. That's when I noticed her smile. Not nervous. Not accidental. Satisfied. In that instant, clarity washed over me. This wasn't oversight. It was design. A final act in a lifetime of quiet cruelty, staged in front of an audience she knew would never look closely enough to question it. I looked at the chair. At the trash. At my reflection in the shiny lid of one of the bins, small, composed, painfully calm. Then I stood straighter. My sister raised an eyebrow, as if daring me to protest. I didn't. Instead, I reached down and picked up the gift I had placed carefully beside the chair earlier. The box was heavier than it looked, wrapped neatly in white paper and silver ribbon. "I hope you enjoy the rest of your day," I said evenly. Her smile flickered, just for a moment. I turned and walked away. Behind me, I could feel eyes following, curiosity rippling through the crowd. I heard someone whisper my name, another voice asking where I was going. But no one stopped me. No one ever had before. As I stepped outside, the noise of the reception dulled, replaced by the steady rhythm of my own breathing. With each step away from that chair, that trash, that moment, something loosened inside my chest. I wasn't leaving in defeat. I was leaving by choice. The moment the venue doors closed behind me, the noise of the wedding faded into a dull, distant hum. Sunlight spilled across the gravel path, too bright, too ordinary for what had just happened. I walked slowly at first, the weight of the gift steady in my arms, my heels clicking like a countdown I hadn't realized I'd started. I reached my car and placed the box gently on the passenger seat, as if it were fragile. In a way, it was. Not because it could break, but because it held years of restraint, patience, and quiet planning. I sat behind the wheel without starting the engine, hands resting loosely in my lap, letting the moment catch up to me. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I had imagined this kind of humiliation would crush me, the way smaller slights had before. But something had shifted. Maybe it was the finality of it, the way my sister had looked at me without even pretending. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe it was the simple truth that I had already survived worse. Inside the reception hall, things were unfolding without me. I learned later how it happened. The coordinator had tapped the microphone, smiling nervously as guests settled into their seats. She had been instructed, by me, to make a brief announcement before dinner was served. A thank you. A surprise. A gesture of generosity. My sister had been glowing then, basking in attention, assuming the world was still bending in her favor. Until it wasn't. "There's been a change regarding the venue's ownership," the coordinator announced. Conversation stalled. Forks paused midair. My sister's smile froze, confusion flickering across her face. She turned toward the coordinator, then toward our parents, searching for reassurance. The explanation continued, measured, professional. The venue, it turned out, had been quietly sold. The new owner had finalized the transfer that very morning. The event could continue only under revised terms. Terms my sister hadn't agreed to. Because she hadn't been consulted. When she demanded to know who would do this, who would ruin her wedding day like some petty villain, the coordinator hesitated. She glanced down at the card in her hand, then read the name aloud. Mine. Witnesses said my sister went pale so fast they thought she might faint. She screamed, actually screamed, accusing the staff of lying, of sabotaging her. Her new husband stood beside her, stunned, realizing for the first time that there were parts of her life he knew nothing about. The irony wasn't lost on me. The venue had been my investment, years in the making. I'd poured money into it quietly, anonymously, while my family dismissed my work as temporary and not serious. I never corrected them. Letting them underestimate me had been easier. And useful. I had planned to gift her the venue rights as a wedding surprise, an olive branch I wasn't sure she deserved but had been willing to extend anyway. That was what the box had held. That was what I had been ready to give. But respect was the condition. And she had broken it. I started the car as my phone buzzed endlessly, missed calls, texts ranging from furious to frantic. I didn't answer any of them. I pulled onto the road, the venue shrinking in my rearview mirror. I wasn't celebrating her downfall. I was reclaiming myself. For once, my silence wasn't weakness. It was control. By the time I reached the edge of town, the sun was beginning to set, the sky streaked with soft gold and muted pink. I pulled over without thinking, parking beside an open field where the air smelled clean and unclaimed. The world felt strangely calm, as if it hadn't noticed the small earthquake that had just reshaped my life. My phone was still vibrating when I finally picked it up. Voicemails. Messages. Notifications stacked on top of each other, all demanding a version of me I no longer owed anyone. I read a few without responding. My mother's message trembled with confusion. My father's was clipped, restrained, already edging toward blame. My sister's, there were dozens, swung wildly between rage and disbelief. How could you do this to me? You embarrassed me. You ruined everything. I deleted them all. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. I finally understood something that had taken me years to accept. People who benefit from your silence will always call your boundaries cruelty. I stepped out of the car and stood there, letting the breeze lift my hair, grounding me in my body again. For the first time, I wasn't replaying the past, wasn't rewriting conversations in my head, wondering what I could have said differently. I had said nothing, and it had been enough. Growing up, I believed love meant endurance. That being family meant absorbing pain quietly, proving your loyalty by how much you were willing to tolerate. That belief had shaped every relationship I'd ever had, teaching me to apologize for existing and to confuse patience with worth. That ended today. I didn't feel victorious the way movies promised revenge would feel. There was no rush, no laughter, no dramatic closing line. What I felt was steadier. Heavier. Like standing on solid ground after years of walking on glass. I thought about the chair by the trash cans and realized something that surprised me. I no longer felt humiliation when I pictured it. Just distance. That moment no longer defined me. It never had. It was only proof of how far I'd been willing to bend for people who never planned to meet me halfway. My sister would tell her version of the story. She always did. In her telling, she would be the victim, blindsided and betrayed. People would nod sympathetically, because her voice was louder and her tears more practiced. I didn't need to correct them. I had spent too long trying to be understood by people who were committed to misunderstanding me. Walking away wasn't surrender, it was selection. I was choosing peace over proximity, self-respect over approval. As darkness settled, I got back into the car and drove home, not to the apartment where I had waited quietly for invitations, but to a future I hadn't fully imagined yet. One where I no longer showed up early to be useful, no longer stayed late to be overlooked. I wasn't the girl seated outside, next to the trash. I was the woman who stood up, picked up her worth, and left. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.